The Rise of the Megacity by Tammy Zambo. Population growth, a matter of history. Almost since the beginning of human existence, the number of people in the world has grown. One increase in population began about AD 900, when people began forming settlements that relied on raising crops and domesticated livestock rather than exclusively on hunting. The world's population began to expand rapidly around AD 1700. One reason for this growth is that the plague had finally stopped being a major cause of death in Europe. This rapid population growth helped make the Industrial Revolution possible. Industrialization eventually helped the world's population grow even more rapidly. The world's population in 1700 was about 600 million people. In AD 500, the world's population had been about 200 million people, and in AD 1000, there were about 300 million people in the world. Even in this relatively early period of human society, some large cities formed. Ancient Rome had a population of 1 million residents around AD 175. The city of Thebes in ancient Egypt probably had 50,000 residents as early as 1300 BC. Sometime before the Industrial Revolution, which began about 1750 in Britain, the rate of population growth began to rise dramatically. By 1800, the world population was about 1 billion people. Since about 1950, the population has skyrocketed. Today, about 6.4 billion people live on the planet. Cities on the rise. One reason the rate of population growth changed during the Industrial Revolution was that scientific advancements such as modern medicine and sanitation saved and extended people's lives. Longer lives then led to a greater number of children. As industries expanded and the population swelled, large numbers of people began moving from rural areas to cities to take jobs in the factories that were springing up. The cities grew quickly, much faster than the rural areas. By 2001, there were nearly 20 city regions with more than 10 million people, called megacities. While cities all over the world have grown rapidly in recent years, some cities declined in population. About 20 major cities in the United States, such as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and Toledo, Ohio, have experienced declining populations. Exponential growth. The increase in world population is an example of exponential growth. This type of growth begins slowly but later picks up tremendous speed. In recent decades, world growth has sometimes been called the population explosion, because the bigger the population is, the faster it reproduces itself. What this example means for the world's population is that it takes less and less time for the number of people in the world to double. The population doubled from 500 million to 1 billion people between 1500 and 1800, a period of 300 years. It only took about 130 years to double again to 2 billion people, and another 45 years to once again double to 4 billion people, which was the world's population in the late 1970s. Urban growth in developing countries. The greatest changes in rates of population growth are taking place in developing countries. Urban areas in many parts of the developing world are growing rapidly. By about 2007, 1/2 of the world's population will live in cities. Almost all of this growth will occur in the urban areas of developing countries. In developed countries, 75% of the population already lives in cities, and that number is not expected to increase much by 2030. Migration and immigration. Cities are growing in part because more of their residents are being born than are dying. In addition, as cities spread out, they surround areas that were once considered rural. A third cause of growth is migration, or the movement of people. Scientists who study changes in population are called demographers. People move from rural to urban areas for a wide variety of reasons. Possibly the most common reason is that cities provide more economic opportunities for more people than rural areas. Today, cities often provide better education and better health care opportunities. Immigration may be caused by the reasons just described. However, a further development often takes place. When immigrants arrive in a city, they typically settle into small communities within that city. After they have made a strong start, they send for family members from their former country to join them in this country. This pattern is called chain immigration. Most of the immigration throughout United States history has been chain immigration. People are also motivated to migrate to cities by issues that make it difficult to continue living in rural areas. Disappearing jobs are one such issue. Some farms in the United States are being swallowed up by large farming corporations or are sold and converted into housing developments or other uses. Other rural jobs in the United States, such as fishing, mining, oil production, and ranching, have also declined. Another important issue is called eco-migration, which is migration triggered by environmental changes. Wind and water have eroded the soil in some areas, or the soil's nutrients have been lost, and it can no longer be farmed. Catastrophic events, such as floods, drought, mudslides, and hurricanes, can also result in eco-migration. Political unrest is yet another reason behind immigration. Wars and other conflicts in areas such as Europe, Africa, and the Middle East have uprooted hundreds of thousands of people. These people become refugees and must find new places to live. Many refugees eventually move to cities to make a new start. City slums. Cities with rapid population growth face many problems, particularly in developing countries. One major problem is overcrowding, which poses difficulties in housing. When a city grows very quickly, newcomers arrive faster than housing can be built, if there is enough affordable land available to build on at all. People who cannot find housing must make it themselves from scraps of wood, cardboard, and metal. In many cities, shanty towns or slums filled with these makeshift shelters extend for miles. In fact, a large number of city dwellers in developing countries live in slums. Some slums occupy enormous amounts of land. One slum area of Nairobi, Kenya, has 400,000 residents. Hundreds of thousands of people also live in slum districts of Calcutta, India, and Lagos, Nigeria. Slums lack services such as basic sanitation, clean water, and electricity. These conditions are perfect for the epidemic spread of diseases such as cholera, dysentery, typhus, typhoid, and tuberculosis. Housing and basic services are not the only areas of concern in growing cities. Cities in developing countries often employ people in poorly built factories, which are unsafe for workers. Besides having dangerous working conditions, these factories pollute the air. In addition, the streets are choked with cars and trucks, creating still more air pollution. In Mexico City, Mexico, air pollution has reached such a high level that people are only allowed to drive their cars 6 days each week. The making of a suburb. Growing cities in developed countries face challenges too. One major problem is urban sprawl. Most cities spread outward as they grow, adding one suburb after another. Many people like to move to these suburbs because there is more room for a large house and lawn than in the cities. Suburbs, however, cannot be made up of houses alone. They also need public buildings such as schools, town halls, churches, office parks for work, shopping facilities such as malls, and roads to connect all of these buildings together and to connect each suburb to the heart of the city. In some parts of the world, suburbs spread out so far from the center of a city that they run into suburbs of other cities. The resulting chain of cities and their suburbs is called an urban corridor. One urban corridor in the United States extends from Washington, D.C. to Boston, Massachusetts, a distance of about 500 miles, or 800 kilometers. Ecological footprints. Urban sprawl takes an immense amount of space and eats up important natural areas. In the United States, new suburbs cover thousands of square miles of land every year. Land that was once rich farmland, dense forest, or precious wetland. Beyond this surface area, still more land is required to provide for waste disposal and to supply necessary natural resources such as water, wood, and petroleum to support all the people who live in the sprawling city. The land area representing the impact of a population on the natural world around it is called an ecological footprint. For example, the ecological footprint of New York City includes the reservoirs northwest of the city that supply its drinking water. One of these reservoirs, the Cannonsville Reservoir, is more than 100 miles northwest of Manhattan. Ecological footprints are larger in developed countries than in developing ones because people in developed nations consume more resources. Factories and automobiles in cities produce large quantities of carbon dioxide. Increasing the level of this gas in Earth's atmosphere might be related to global warming. Accumulating challenges. Still other problems plague the cities of developed countries. Urban sprawl creates more traffic, which generates more air pollution and uses up more of the limited supply of the world's oil reserves. The world's supply of fresh water is dwindling, yet populations in growing cities demand more of it. In addition, as more of a city's money and attention are devoted to the building of suburbs, less money and attention are directed toward maintaining and repairing inner cities. Buildings, bridges, and roads begin to break down. The number of available jobs in the city decreases as businesses themselves relocate to the suburbs. Unemployment increases. These processes only worsen the poverty of inner-city residents who cannot afford to move to the suburbs. The case of Easter Island. What if populations overuse the land and natural resources that support them? One example is the people who lived on Easter Island in the Pacific Ocean. Today, the island is known for hundreds of enormous stone statues, some of which weigh 50 tons. Archaeologists have learned that a group of Polynesians arrived by sea and settled the island around AD 400. The land was fertile and had many trees. For about 700 years, the population remained low, and the society thrived. By 1600, about 7,000 people may have lived on the island. As the population rose sharply, it depleted the resources of the island. The trees disappeared as the people built houses, canoes, and the beams they used to set the statues into place. The cleared land was used to grow crops, but without the trees to anchor it, the soil eroded and lost nutrients. As the people lost the ability to build fishing boats and to grow crops, their food supply decreased. Fresh water, too, was limited. Competition for the scarce resources grew fierce, and war broke out. In the 1860s, more than 1,400 people were taken to Peru as enslaved people. Nearly all of them died. The enslaved people who returned to Easter Island brought disease with them. As a result, more than 1,000 other people died of smallpox. By 1900, the peak population of 7,000 had plunged to 111. Beginning a turnaround. Many people have come up with ideas to ease some of the problems associated with population growth. For example, paper manufacturing companies in the United States do business with the logging industry, which cuts down the trees needed to make paper. In recent years, most paper companies have realized that the cutting down of trees can do a great deal of harm to the environment. Therefore, these paper companies now provide money for programs for planting new trees to replace those that have been cut down. Similarly, most communities in the United States have a recycling program. These programs recycle newspapers, glass bottles, and tin cans. The recycling of newspapers means that new paper can be made from old paper instead of from fresh wood. Many city and other local governments in the United States make certain that at least some of the paper they purchase comes from recycling rather than from cutting fresh timber. In some parts of the United States, new businesses have been moving to small cities instead of large ones. This idea cuts down on problems such as overcrowding that are caused by the numbers of people in the largest cities. Developing smaller cities called micropolitan areas have certain advantages. Because these cities are closer to rural areas, they can help sustain and even revive rural economies through small-scale industries, including the processing and marketing of agricultural products. In addition, the governments of micropolitan areas can respond more quickly and effectively to the needs of their residents, especially the poor. It is easy to become discouraged by the environmental damage and other problems that rapid population growth causes. Some of that damage cannot be completely undone. Many scientists, however, are confident that by implementing ideas such as these, in addition to better conserving the resources we have not yet used, we can reduce the negative impact on our lives.